A frantic bark tore through the night. Rook, Isaac's GSD service dog, was plunging straight into the blizzard, ignoring every command. Isaac, a veteran, knew his dog. This wasn't him chasing a wolf. This was the sound of panic. He hurried to follow, his flashlight cutting a beam through the whiteout.
Come on, stay with me.
Then he saw it. A figure collapsed by the fence. As he got closer, he realized it was a young woman. And then, his light panned down. A dark red streak, a terrible contrast against the snow. Blood? It was still warm, steaming slightly in the freezing air. She wasn't just lost, she was being hunted. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The quiet of the ranch was a fragile thing, a thin layer of ice over deep, cold water. Isaac Perry knew. He spent every day testing its thickness, walking softly, trying not to break through. The ranch house sat in a shallow bowl of the Montana landscape, miles from the nearest paved road. It was the only thing Isaac had left from his grandfather, a place built of log and stone against a world that had grown too loud. Inside, the living room was lit only by the gray, fading light of the late afternoon and the blue glow of a laptop screen. Isaac sat in a worn leather armchair, staring at the screen, though he hadn't read a word in 10 minutes. He was a man in his late 30s, tall and with a lean, healthy build that spoke of physical work. His brown hair, just long enough to curl over his ears, was marked with silver at the temples. His face was weathered, etched with lines of sun and worry that should have belonged to someone 20 years older, but his eyes were clear and kind. He wore what he always wore in the cold months, an old brown leather jacket left unzipped, a plaid flannel shirt of dark navy and bright red, faded blue jeans, and heavy scuffed work boots. The article on the screen was about an escalating border dispute in Eastern Europe. The cursor blinked. The silence in the room began to change, twisting into a high-pitched whine that existed only in his head. The walls of the room, solid wood and stone, suddenly felt like they were shrinking, the ceiling pressing down. Isaac's breathing hitched, catching in his chest. He tried to pull in a full breath, but his lungs wouldn't obey. The ringing grew louder, a familiar prelude to the storm inside his head. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird in a small cage. Before the panic could pull him under, a heavy weight settled on his knee. Isaac blinked, his focus shifting. A long, noble muzzle rested on his jeans, and a pair of intelligent, dark brown eyes stared up at him, unwavering. Rook. The dog was a 5-year-old German shepherd, a striking animal of gray and white fur with the classic black saddle marking. He was not a pet, he was a lifeline. Trained as a service dog, Rook's entire world was calibrated to the man in the chair. He let out a low, almost silent woof of air, his warm breath fogging the cold air in the room. "Hey, boy," Isaac whispered, his voice tight. Rook shifted, pushing his head harder against Isaac's hand until Isaac's fingers found the thick fur of his ruff. Isaac closed his eyes and focused. He felt the solid, living warmth of the dog. He matched his breathing to the slow, steady rhythm of the animal beside him. In, out. He focused on the texture of the fur, the weight of the head, the unconditional presence. Rook was his anchor. He was the counterweight to the rattling ghosts of Ramadi and Fallujah, the silent reminder that 1973 was a long time ago, that he was here, in Montana, and he was safe. Slowly, the ringing in his ears faded. The walls receded. His heart slowed to a dull, heavy beat. "Good boy," Isaac murmured, finally opening his eyes. Rook licked his hand once, then settled at his feet, content that his job was done. It was only then, in the returning silence, that Isaac heard the other sound. It was not the wind he was used to, the gentle sighing through the pines. This was a rising shriek, a deep-throated howl that sounded like a freight train passing too close. He stood and walked to the wide picture window. The world he had been looking at moments before was gone. It had been erased, replaced by a churning, violent wall of white. The blizzard had arrived. It wasn't just snow, it was a whiteout, horizontal and furious, hitting the glass with a sound like handfuls of thrown sand. The light in the room flickered, and the laptop screen went black as the power cut out. The house plunged into a sudden, heavy darkness. "Well," Isaac said to the dog, "guess that's that." He felt the familiar isolation settle over him, but this time it felt different. It was absolute. He went to the kitchen and picked up the landline phone from the wall. He held it to his ear. There was no dial tone, only a faint, empty static. The storm had already taken the line. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket. He already knew what he would see, but the ritual was necessary. The top of the screen read, "No service." The ranch was in a cellular dead zone, a geographical quirk that had once felt like a blessing. Now it just felt like a trap. He was cut off. No power, no internet, no phone. Just him, his dog, and the storm. He was about to light the oil lamps when Rook stood up. It wasn't the slow, casual movement of before. The dog was instantly alert, his head cocked, his body rigid. The fur on his shoulders bristled. "What is it?" Isaac asked. Rook moved silently to the front door, his claws ticking lightly on the wooden floor. He stood 2 feet from the door and let out a low, menacing growl, a sound Isaac had not heard in over a year. "Probably just a coyote, bud, or a deer trying to get out of the wind." Rook ignored him. He took a step closer to the door and barked. It was not a request. It was an alarm, a deep, aggressive, chest-heavy bark that echoed hard in the small house. "Hey, easy," Isaac commanded, but the dog was insistent. Rook barked again, louder this time, then scratched at the door, looking back at Isaac with a frantic urgency. This was not his service animal. This was a German shepherd on high alert. All right, I hear you." A cold knot formed in Isaac's stomach. Rook didn't false alarm. Isaac pulled his heavy leather jacket back on, zipping it this time. He grabbed a heavy, high-lumen flashlight from the hook by the door and jammed a wool hat onto his head. He opened the door, and the storm tried to rip it from his hand. The wind screamed in his ears, stealing his breath. Snow, hard as pellets, stung his exposed skin. Rook bounded out into the white chaos without hesitation. "Rook, get back here!" Isaac shouted, his voice swallowed by the wind. The dog was a gray and white shape, already 30 feet away, plunging through the rapidly deepening drifts toward the southern fence line. Cursing, Isaac pulled his collar tight and followed, the beam of his flashlight cutting a weak, swirling cone in the blizzard. He could barely see his own boots. The wind shoved him, trying to turn him around. "Rook, come on, boy, this is crazy." Then he saw the dog standing stock still near the fence, barking not with aggression now, but with sharp, urgent sounds. Isaac pushed forward, his thighs burning from the effort of moving through the heavy snow. The flashlight beam found the dog, and then what the dog was standing over. It was a dark shape crumpled against the lowest wire of the barbed wire fence. At first, Isaac thought it was a deer. Then the beam settled, and he saw it was a person. He rushed forward, kneeling. It was a woman, young, maybe late 20s. Her dark hair was matted with snow and ice. Her skin was a terrifying, waxy white. She was wearing clothes entirely wrong for the weather, a thin jacket, dark jeans, and athletic shoes now buried in the snow. He put his gloved fingers to her neck. He searched, his heart pounding. Nothing. He pressed harder, a faint, thready beat, dangerously slow. Thump, thump. She was alive, barely. His eyes scanned her, and he saw what Rook had smelled. A dark, ugly stain spread from her side, melting the snow it touched. Blood. His military training kicked in. He reached for his phone, a useless block of cold metal. He thought of the landline, dead. The isolation he had confirmed just minutes ago was no longer a simple inconvenience. It was a death sentence. He couldn't call 911. He couldn't call for help of any kind. He couldn't leave her here. She would be dead in 10 minutes. He looked around, as if an answer might appear in the swirling vortex of white. There was no one, just him, his dog, and the half-dead woman at his feet. He was forced. He had no choice. "Rook, inside! Go!" he yelled at the dog. With a grunt, Isaac looped his arms under the woman's body. She was light, a dead weight, He lifted her, cradling her against his chest, and turned his back to the wind. He began the long, slow march back to the house, his fragile peace shattered, the world and all its violence breaking through the ice. The front door slammed shut, the heavy wood and deadbolt cutting off the howl of the blizzard with a sudden, muffled finality. The silence of the house rushed in, replaced only by the sound of Isaac's own ragged breathing and the steady drip of melting snow from his human burden. Rook was already there, shaking the snow from his gray and white coat, his eyes fixed on the woman in Isaac's arms. "Lamps," Isaac grunted, as much to himself as to the dog. He carried her to the great bearskin rug in front of the stone fireplace, laying her down as gently as his strained muscles would allow. She was terrifyingly still. Her pale face, framed by dark, wet hair, was slack, her lips tinged with blue. Rook stood a few feet away, a silent sentinel watching his master work. Isaac's mind was blessedly quiet. The panic, the ghosts, the ringing in his ears, all of it was gone, suppressed by a flood of training he had prayed he would never need again. This was muscle memory. This was the algorithm of survival. He lit 2 oil lamps, the soft, flickering orange light pushing back the shadows, and placed them on the hearth. Then he retrieved his old medic bag from the bottom of a hall closet. It was a canvas satchel, faded green, and still stocked. He had never been able to bring himself to empty it. "All right," he whispered. He grabbed a pair of trauma shears. "Let's see what we've got." He cut away the thin, sodden jacket, then the layers beneath it, a flannel shirt and a thin thermal, all soaked with water and blood. He worked with a detached efficiency, his hands sure and steady. The cold had slowed the bleeding, but the wound on her side was ugly. A deep, ragged tear along her ribs. It looked like a graze, but a nasty one. Not a bullet, he thought. It looked like she'd been torn on rock, or maybe the barbed wire fence. He cleaned the wound, his movements precise, swabbing away the blood and grime. She didn't flinch. Her breathing was dangerously shallow. "You're going into shock, ma'am. We can't have that." He opened a sterile IV kit. He tied the tourniquet around her upper arm, found a good vein on the first try, and slid the needle in with an expert touch. He hung the bag of saline from the antler of a floor lamp he'd dragged closer. The slow, steady drip of the fluid was the only sound in the room besides the crackling of the logs he'd just thrown on the fire. Next, the sutures. He threaded the needle, his large, calloused hands moving with the delicate grace of a surgeon. He began to close the wound, stitch by stitch. He was focused only on the task, on the pull of the thread, the clean line of the closing skin. He was 1,000 miles away, in a dusty tent filled with the smell of iron and antiseptic, his hands moving just like this, trying to put people back together. He finished the last stitch and taped a heavy gauze dressing over the wound. He had done all he could. He wrapped her in a thick wool blanket, leaving her arm exposed for the IV. He stood up, his knees popping, the adrenaline beginning to fade. He looked at the pile of her wet clothes. He should move them away from the fire. He picked up the sodden jacket. It was surprisingly heavy. He was about to toss it onto a boot tray when his fingers brushed against something in the lining, near the hem. It was small, hard, and perfectly square. It didn't belong. He stopped. The quiet of the house suddenly felt cold. He carried the jacket closer to the lamplight, his suspicion returning like a sudden fever. He felt the object again. It was sewn in, deliberately hidden. Isaac pulled his pocket knife, opened the small blade, and carefully slit the stitches of the lining. He pushed his fingers into the opening and pulled the object out. It was a black plastic square, no bigger than a quarter, sealed against the elements. A tiny green light, no bigger than a pinprick, blinked with a slow, steady rhythm. A tracker. Isaac's blood ran cold. The silence of the room was now absolute. He looked from the blinking green light to the unconscious woman by his fire, and every instinct he had honed over a decade of war screamed at him. This was not an accident. This was not a hiker caught in the storm. She had been hunted, and she had brought the hunt to his door. The people looking for this tracker were the kind of people who didn't stop, and the storm wouldn't hold them off forever. He was compromised. His mind raced, calculating, discarding options. He couldn't destroy it. That would just tell them where it had stopped. He couldn't leave it here. He had to move it. He had to spoof the signal. He looked at the woman. He looked at the dog. Rook was watching him, sensing the sudden, sharp shift in his master's demeanor. "Watch her," Isaac commanded, his voice a low growl. He went to the kitchen, found a small waterproof plastic bag meant for matches, and grabbed a sheet of aluminum foil. He wrapped the tracker tightly in the foil, then sealed it in the small plastic bag. He pulled his heavy coat back on, snatched his hat, and plunged back into the storm. The wind hit him like a physical blow, almost knocking him from the porch. He ignored it. He pushed through the blizzard around the side of the house, his boots sinking to his shins in the drifts. He fought his way to the creek that marked the western edge of his property. It was a raging black torrent of snowmelt, too fast and violent to freeze. He found what he was looking for, a heavy waterlogged pine log, half submerged in the icy mud at the bank. He knelt, his fingers numb, and used a length of cord from his pocket to tie the small sealed bag to the log. He made the knot tight, checking it twice. He stood, took a deep breath of the freezing air, and shoved the heavy log into the main current. It bobbed once, spun in the eddy, and then the creek caught it. It was swept away, disappearing into the white fury of the storm in seconds, carrying its blinking green signal far down the canyon, away from his home. He had bought time. He didn't know how much. He staggered back to the house, the cold now settled deep in his bones. He secured the door, shedding his snow-caked coat. He turned to the fireplace. Nothing had changed. The IV dripped, the fire crackled, and the woman's eyes were open. She was staring at him, not at his face, but at the empty space where his medic bag sat, then at the IV in her arm, then at the dressing on her side. Her eyes were wide, dark, and filled with a frantic animal terror. Isaac said nothing. He stood by the door, his arms crossed, his posture rigid. He was not her rescuer. He was the man whose sanctuary she had just contaminated. He was wary, his suspicion a tangible thing in the air between them. She tried to sit up, but a sharp gasp of pain cut her short. She fell back against the blankets, her breathing shallow and fast. "Where?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Who are you?" Before Isaac could form a reply, Rook moved. The dog, who had been sitting patiently, stood up and walked slowly toward the hearth. "Rook, stay," Isaac said, his voice sharp. The dog paused, looked back at him, and then deliberately disobeyed. He continued forward, his paws silent on the stone hearth. He stopped beside the woman, his head level with her shoulder. She flinched, turning her head, too weak to pull away. "It's okay," Isaac said, more a command to the dog than a comfort to the woman. "He won't hurt you." Rook lowered his massive head. He sniffed her hand, then the blanket. He let out a low, soft whine, a sound Isaac had only ever heard the dog make when he himself was at his worst. Then the dog did something that stunned Isaac to his core. Rook nudged his cold, wet nose under her limp hand, pushing it up slightly. He rested his muzzle on the blanket beside her and looked at her, his dark eyes soft. He was offering comfort. Isaac just stared. This was his dog, his service animal trained for him. He was aloof with strangers, wary of anyone who wasn't Isaac. He was a guardian, not a nursemaid. In 5 years, Isaac had never seen him do this. Never. Isaac looked at the woman, this complete stranger who was pale and terrified. He thought of the blinking green tracker now floating miles away in an icy creek. His entire tactical mind screamed that she was a threat, a package of high-grade danger delivered directly to his door. But his dog, his anchor, his partner, the one living creature he trusted without reservation, disagreed. Rook nudged her hand again, and this time her fingers weakly grasped at the fur on his neck. Isaac's suspicion didn't vanish. It was too strong, too logical. But as he watched his dog comfort the stranger, a tiny hairline crack formed in the wall of his certainty. He didn't trust her, but he trusted his dog. The heavy silence in the room stretched thin, pulled taut between Isaac's rigid suspicion and the woman's ragged terror. The only sounds were the fierce shriek of the blizzard outside and the low crackle of the fireplace. Rook remained by the woman's side, a silent gray and white statue of reassurance. Isaac finally broke the silence. He didn't move from his position by the door, his arms crossed, his stance a clear barrier. "The tracker I found sewn into your jacket. Who's looking for you?" Her eyes, dark and wide in her pale face, darted from him to the dog and back again. She was assessing him, weighing the risk. She had seen his hands, skilled and steady as they sutured her wound. She had seen his dog, a creature of pure loyalty, offering comfort. She had no other choice. "My name is Leah," she whispered, her voice rough from the cold. "Leah Adams. I'm an investigative journalist." Isaac's expression hardened. A journalist? In his experience, that word was just a precursor to chaos, to digging up things that were buried for a reason. It was trouble of the loudest kind. "And people hunt journalists out here?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "They do," she said, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "When they have this." She winced, her hand moving weakly from Rook's fur to a small, waterproof belt pack that Isaac hadn't noticed, still buckled around her waist. Her fingers fumbled with the zipper. Isaac tensed, his body coiled, watching her hand. But she didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a small, flat object, no bigger than a wallet. It was a rugged, rubber-encased external hard drive. "This," she breathed, her knuckles white as she gripped it. "This is why." "What's on it?" Isaac asked. Tears welled in her eyes, born of trauma and exhaustion, and they spilled over, tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. "Proof, irrefutable proof. I was meeting a source, an insider at Genesis Pharmaceuticals. His name was Ryan Cole." She introduced the name Ryan Cole as if he were standing in the room, a young research analyst who had been brave and terrified. "He found data they were burying, clinical trial data. He wanted to do the right thing." "And?" Isaac pressed, impatient. "They were waiting for us," she choked out, a sob catching in her throat. "At the meeting spot. It wasn't a boardroom. It was an abandoned pull-off miles from anywhere. They executed him, right in front of me." Isaac's jaw tightened. He'd seen death, seen it in all its brutal forms, but this sounded like something else. Cold. "They're a private security team," Leah continued, her voice trembling as she forced the words out. "The ones who work for Genesis. They're not just guards, they're fixers. The man in charge, he looked at me. After he shot Ryan." She couldn't finish the thought, her body shaking. "It's all on here," she said, lifting the drive. "I was filming. On a small pin camera, I was trying to document the data transfer. Instead, I recorded a murder. I recorded him. Harris, that's the name I heard. Harris. It's all on the drive. The video." Isaac's focus sharpened. A name. Harris. A specific target. He walked closer, his boots heavy on the wood floor, and took the hard drive from her shaking hand. He looked at it, this small piece of plastic and metal that was worth a human life. "What did you call them?" Isaac asked, his voice low. "The security team." "Apex," she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "Apex Security." The word hit Isaac like a physical blow. The air in his lungs turned to ice. He stood perfectly still. He knew that name. It wasn't a name you read in newspapers. It was a name you heard in whispers in forward operating bases, a rumor traded in hushed tones by men in the special operations community. Apex Security. They weren't just fixers. They were ghosts, deniable operators who did the jobs that corporations and shadow government agencies couldn't put on any official books. They were rumored to have cleaned up messes from Central Africa to the South China Sea. And they were here, in Montana, hunting this woman. The entire context of his situation shifted. This wasn't a local problem. This wasn't corporate greed spilling over. This was a Tier 1 threat, active and lethal. and it was on his land. The blizzard raging outside was no longer just a storm. It was the only thing keeping him and this woman alive. He turned and looked at Leah. His suspicion was gone, replaced by a cold, dreadful clarity. She wasn't trouble. She was a witness, marked for execution. His first instinct, the one that had kept him alive for 12 years, was to sever all contact. Get her out. As soon as the storm breaks, drive her to the highway, drop her off, disappear. They have to be stopped, Leah whispered, as if reading his mind. What they did to Ryan, he was a good man. He just wanted... They won't be stopped. Isaac cut her off, his voice flat. You don't understand what you're dealing with. If they know you're here, they're not just going to let you walk away, and they will not leave a witness. Then what do we do? She asked, the terror returning full force. We can't call the police. They'll find us. Isaac paced the room, his mind racing, tactical scenarios playing out and being discarded. The tracker was gone, but for how long? They'd realize it was a spoof. They'd backtrack. They'd use the thermal drone she'd mentioned. They'd find the house. He was trapped. The ranch, his sanctuary, had become a prison. He felt the old panic, the walls pressing in. He looked at Leah, her face a mask of pale exhaustion, her knuckles white on the blanket. He looked at the hard drive in his hand. And then he looked at Rook. The dog had not moved. He was still faithfully by her side, his body a solid, warm presence in the flickering lamplight. He had not growled at her, had not shown a single sign of aggression since that first moment at the fence. He was simply guarding her. Isaac stopped pacing. He looked at his dog, the one being in the universe he trusted without question. Rook's entire purpose was to sense the dissonance in the world, to find the threat and anchor Isaac against it. And right now, Rook had anchored himself to Leah. His own skepticism, his own fear, was screaming at him to run. But Rook's instinct was to protect. Isaac made his choice. He would trust his dog. The shift was immediate. The anxious hermit receded, and the Marine sergeant took his place. His voice became clipped, his movements precise. "All right," he said. He walked to a heavy cedar footlocker at the end of his bed, a relic from his grandfather. He keyed in the combination for the heavy padlock and lifted the lid. Inside, beneath neatly folded dress uniforms he hadn't touched in a decade, was a bulky olive-drab hard case. He pulled it out, set it on the bed, and opened it. Inside, nestled in foam, was an Iridium satellite phone. "You said you can't call the police," Leah said, confused. "I'm not," Isaac said, powering on the device. The phone whirred, its small monochrome screen lighting up as it searched for a satellite. "I'm calling in a specialist." He held the phone to his ear, listening to the faint electronic chirp as it connected. He dialed a number he knew better than his own. It rang 3 times. A voice, sharp and alert even over the satellite hiss, answered. "Yeah." "Mark, it's Perry. Isaac Perry." There was a pause. "Isaac? Man, it's been, 3 years? Where are you?" "Montana," Isaac said, cutting to the chase. "Listen, I don't have time. I'm in a situation. I've got a package. High-value data. Needs immediate extraction." "Whoa, hold on," the voice, Mark Jensen, said. Isaac could picture him, a caffeine-fueled genius who had been the brains of their SIGINT unit. "What kind of situation? You stateside." "It's hostile," Isaac said, his eyes scanning the windows. "Tier 1, the package is a video file, proof of a wet-work execution." "Isaac, what did you walk into?" "The operators are Apex Security." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. When Mark spoke again, his voice had lost all its casualness. "Confirm last. Apex?" "Confirmed," Isaac said. "I've got the witness and the drive. I'm dark. Landlines and cell are down. I'm on this sat phone, but I think they're already in country. I need a secure uplink. I need to get this file to you fast." "Blizzard outside," Isaac added. "That's the only cover I have. It's buying me time." "All right," Mark said. "All business." A burst transmission from an iridium is going to be slow, but I can do it. I'll set up a secure handshake. I'm sending you coordinates for a dead drop on my server, encrypted on your end. I'll take it from there." "Got it. Sending my handshake now," Isaac said, his fingers already working on the phone's keypad. He hung up. He looked at Leah, who was watching him with a mixture of awe and fear. "My friend Mark is setting up a secure server," Isaac said, his voice calm and steady for the first time. "We're going to get your video off that drive and into his hands. He'll know what to do with it." Isaac finished the call with Mark, the satellite phone screen going dark in his hand. The small, sterile beep of the disconnection seemed to vanish into the heavy, lamplit silence of the room. Outside, the blizzard howled, a sound of pure, elemental rage. Inside, the quiet was something else. It was the quiet of a fuse being lit. "He's in," Isaac said, his voice flat, trying to project a calm he did not feel. "He's setting up the server. It's going to take time to upload." Leah was still on the bearskin rug, the wool blanket pulled up to her chin. The IV bag beside her was nearly half empty. Color had returned to her face, but her eyes were wide with a terror that went beyond her injuries. "Thank you. I don't know." "Don't," Isaac cut her off, not unkindly. "Just rest. You need your strength." He was about to check the dressings on her side when Rook, who had been lying by the hearth, lifted his head. It was not a sudden move. It was a slow, deliberate lift, his ears swiveling, his dark eyes locking onto the front window. A second later, his head turned toward the door. "What is it, boy?" Isaac whispered. Rook stood up. The dog's entire body went rigid, his gray and white fur bristling almost imperceptibly along his spine. He didn't move toward the door. He moved to Isaac's side, planting himself against his master's leg. Isaac strained his ears, listening past the roar of the wind. At first, he heard nothing. Then, he caught it. A sound that did not belong. It was not the high-pitched shriek of the wind. It was a low, throbbing, mechanical rumble, a heavy engine working hard, somewhere outside. It was getting closer. "No," Leah breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "The guest room," Isaac commanded, his voice dropping into a register that allowed no argument. "Now, get in the closet. Do not make a sound. Do not move. Not for anything. Understand?" Leah nodded, her face pale. She used the fireplace mantel to pull herself up, her knees buckling. Isaac saw her wince as her stitches pulled, but she bit back the sound, grabbing the rolling IV stand and half limping, half shuffling, out of the living room and into the dark hallway. Isaac moved to the hall closet and pulled out his grandfather's 12-gauge shotgun. He broke it open, his movements economical, and slotted 2 heavy shells into the chambers. He snapped it shut with a solid, definitive sound. Rook let out a whine, his eyes fixed on Isaac. He knew this sound. It was a sound from before. "Easy," Isaac murmured, resting a hand on the dog's head. "Go with her. Stay. Watch." Rook seemed to understand. He turned and padded silently down the hall, disappearing into the same darkness as Leah. Isaac was alone in the living room. The rumble outside grew louder, resolving into the distinct sound of a heavy-duty truck engine. Through the swirling vortex of snow past the window, Isaac saw them. 2 brilliant white headlights, high off the ground, cutting through the blizzard. A vehicle that didn't belong. A vehicle that shouldn't have been able to find this house in a total whiteout. The truck pulled to a stop 20 yards from his porch. The engine idled for a long, heavy moment before cutting out. The headlights died, plunging the yard back into near-total darkness, visible only by the white-on-white of the storm. A high-pitched metallic click as a door opened. A solid thud as it closed. Footsteps on the porch. Not frantic, not hurried. They were steady, measured, confident steps, crunching on the snow-dusted wood. A knock came at the door. It wasn't the frantic pounding of someone lost in the storm. It was a polite, firm rap, rap, rap. Isaac stood to the side of the door, the shotgun held low, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He took a breath and opened the door, just 6 inches. The man standing on his porch was a contradiction. The storm raged around him, but he seemed untouched by it, as if he existed in his own bubble of calm. He was in his 40s with a clean-shaven, handsome face that looked like it belonged in a boardroom. He wore no hat. His short, dark hair was perfectly in place. He was dressed in high-end, matte black tactical gear, not military, but something far more expensive and subtle. He was smiling. It was a calm, pleasant, unnerving smile. This was Harris. "Mr. Perry? Isaac Perry?" Harris asked. His voice was smooth, cultivated. He didn't raise it over the wind. The wind just seemed to quiet around him. Isaac didn't answer. He just stared, his hand tight on the shotgun's forestock. "Terrible storm," Harris continued, that smile never wavering. "I do hope I'm not disturbing you. My name is Harris. I'm with Apex Security." He said the name Apex as if it were a brand of insurance. "You're trespassing," Isaac said, his voice a low growl. "What do you want?" "We're looking for a colleague," Harris said, clasping his gloved hands in front of him. "A young woman, clearly disoriented. She wandered off from a vehicle recovery site just up the ridge. We're dreadfully worried about her. With this weather, well, you haven't seen anyone, have you? Small, dark hair, probably very frightened." Isaac held the man's gaze. "Haven't seen a soul. It's just me and the storm." Harris's smile tightened just a fraction. He tilted his head as if listening to a fascinating, if slightly unbelievable, story. "That's odd," he said, his voice still perfectly pleasant. "Because we were running a thermal drone sweep of the area just before the blizzard got too dense to fly. It picked up 2 distinct heat signatures in this house." The lie hung exposed in the air, cold and stark. Isaac felt his heart hammer against his ribs. The skin on the back of his neck prickled. "Your equipment's wrong," Isaac said, his voice flat. "It's glitching in the cold." It was at that precise moment, the spike in Isaac's stress, the surge of adrenaline that came from being caught in a direct lie by a mortal threat, that the sound came from the shadows behind him. It was a low, barely audible rumble, a vibration that came from deep in Rook's chest. It was not a growl of aggression, meant to threaten Harris. It was a growl of anxiety, meant to alert Isaac. Rook was sensing his handler's extreme stress, and it was setting the dog on edge. Harris's eyes, a very light, very cold blue, flicked past Isaac, focusing on the darkness of the living room. He had heard it. "You have a dog?" Harris asked, his smile widening, as if Isaac had just shared a pleasant secret. "Sounds protective. Big one, too, from the sound of it." "He's a service dog," Isaac said, his grip tightening on the shotgun. "He senses stress, and you're stressing me. You need to leave." "Bartney?" Harris's gaze drifted up past Isaac's head to the utility pole near the corner of the house. "Pity about your phone line," he said casually, nodding toward it. "We noticed it was down at the main road. Must be the storm." The words hit Isaac with the force of a physical blow. Harris knew. He knew there were 2 people. He knew they couldn't call for help. This wasn't a search. This was a confirmation. This was the predator tapping on the glass. The 2 men stared at each other for a long, frozen moment. The blizzard shrieked around them, a wall of white chaos. But on the porch, the air was still, a vacuum of polite, lethal understanding. "Well," Harris said finally, breaking the silence. "My apologies for the intrusion. If you do see her, please let us know. She's very important. We're extremely keen on getting her back." He reached into his pocket and produced a business card. It was matte black, with no name, just the stylized Apex logo and a number. He offered it to Isaac. Isaac did not take it. Harris chuckled, a soft, dry sound. He placed the card on the porch railing, where the wind immediately tried to claim it. "You have a good night, Mr. Perry. Stay warm." He turned, his movements unhurried, and walked back down the steps. He got into the black SUV, the door closing with a heavy, solid sound. The engine turned over, and the high-intensity headlights cut back into the storm. The vehicle turned around in a space it should not have had, its tires gripping the ice, and drove off, disappearing into the white from which it had come. Isaac slammed the door, the heavy wood vibrating in its frame. He threw the deadbolt, the sound echoing in the silent house. He sagged back against the door, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The shotgun felt impossibly heavy. A moment later, Rook was there, pushing his cold, wet nose hard into Isaac's trembling hand. The growling had stopped. He was back in service mode, his presence a solid, grounding weight. Isaac let his hand fall to the dog's head, his fingers gripping the thick fur. Leah emerged from the hallway, her face a white mask. She was clutching the IV pole to stay upright. Was that? Isaac looked at her, his face grim, the last traces of the hermit farmer burned away. That was Harris, he said, his voice low and hard as iron. And he knows. He knows you're here. The sound of the heavy-duty engine faded, swallowed by the relentless shriek of the blizzard. Isaac stood frozen against the door, the 12-gauge shotgun still held in a white-knuckled grip. The heavy, warm presence of Rook pressed against his leg, the dog's body a solid anchor in a world that had just tilted off its axis. The porch was empty. The black business card Harris had left on the railing was gone, stolen by the wind. It was as if he had never been there at all. Only the deep, deliberate tire tracks in the snow proved he was real. Leah appeared from the hallway, her face as white as the snow outside. She was leaning heavily on the IV pole, which she had rolled with her. "He's gone?" "He's gone," Isaac said, his voice flat. He engaged the shotgun's safety with a solid, definitive click. "But he's not gone." "What does that mean?" "It means he wasn't here to search, Leah. He was here to talk." He crossed the room and looked out the picture window, his eyes scanning the impenetrable wall of white. "He knew you were here. The thermal drone was real. He knew the phone line was down. He was telling me that he is in control, that he can get to me whenever he wants." The bravado of the lie he had told Harris evaporated, leaving a cold, acidic fear. "He mentioned the phone line at the main road," Isaac said, thinking aloud. "He said the storm must have taken it out. He was testing me." But it did," Leah said. "The power's out. The phone is dead. The storm did that, right?" "The storm took out the power," Isaac said, moving back to the door. "I need to see what it did to the line." "What? You can't go back out there." Leah's voice was sharp with panic. "That's what he wants. He's probably out there waiting." "Harris?" He had a look in his eyes. "I know the look," Isaac said grimly. "And that's exactly why I have to go. I need to know what I'm dealing with. Lock this door behind me. Don't open it for any sound other than my voice. Understand?" Leah nodded, her jaw tight. Isaac looked down at Rook. The dog was already poised to follow, his body tense. "No, boy," Isaac commanded, his voice firm. "Guard, you stay. Watch her." Rook let out a low, conflicted whine, his loyalty torn. But the command was absolute. He sat, his eyes tracking Isaac, his entire being vibrating with protective energy. Isaac stepped onto the porch and pulled the door shut, hearing the heavy, reassuring sound of the deadbolt sliding into place behind him. The storm hit him with the force of a physical assault. The wind was a solid wall of ice, screaming in his ears, stealing the air from his lungs. He pulled his hat low and leaned into it, his flashlight beam a pathetic, swirling cone that barely illuminated his own boots. He kept the shotgun pointed low, his finger off the trigger. He moved off the porch, sinking into snow that was now well past his shins. He didn't walk. He moved in a low crouch, pausing every few yards, scanning the white chaos. He moved from the cover of the woodshed to the shadow of his generator hut, his training taking over. His senses were on fire. Every howl of the wind sounded like a footstep. Every shadow thrown by his own light looked like a man. It took him 10 minutes to fight his way to the end of his long driveway, where his property met the county road. The utility pole stood like a dark sentinel, its lines invisible in the churning snow. He waded to the base of the pole, his flashlight beam tracing the thick black cable that ran down from the transformer to his junction box. He followed it. Then he saw it. It wasn't a break. It wasn't a tear from a fallen branch. It was a cut. The line had been severed with a single professional slice, the copper wires at its core gleaming, fresh and bright, in the beam of his light. Harris hadn't been guessing. He knew the line was dead because he had ordered it cut. The courteous visit, the polite inquiry. It was a game, a predator toying with its prey. A cold, visceral anger surged through Isaac, momentarily overpowering his fear. He turned and fought his way back to the house, his mind racing. The blizzard wasn't his cover. It was their accomplice. They were using it to set the board, to isolate him completely before they made their final move. He hammered on the door, shouting his own name. The bolt slid back, and he stumbled inside, slamming the door and locking it himself. Leah and Rook were exactly where he had left them. "You were right," Leah whispered, seeing the look on his face. "He cut it," Isaac said, his voice a low growl. "He cut the line himself. They're out there, and they're serious." "Your friend," Leah said, her eyes wide. "Mark, the satellite phone. You have to call him. You have to tell him." Isaac was already moving. He pulled the heavy iridium sat phone from his coat pocket, where he'd kept it for warmth. He flipped it open and hit the power button. The small screen flickered to life. He watched it, waiting for the familiar "searching for network" message. Instead, a different message flashed, one he had only ever seen on military-grade equipment. "Signal interference detected." He stared at it. "No." He powered it down and turned it back on. The same message. He toggled the antenna. Nothing. Just a faint hissing static from the earpiece. "What's wrong?" Leah asked, seeing his expression. "They're jamming me," Isaac said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. While Harris was on the porch, distracting me, his team was setting up. "They've established a tactical jamming field. They've cut me off." The shotgun suddenly felt useless. The walls of the house, his grandfather's stone and log fortress, felt like cardboard. He was trapped. The realization hit him with the force of an explosion. The high-pitched whine returned to his ears, louder this time, a piercing shriek that drowned out the storm. The cozy, lamplit room began to close in, the shadows in the corners deepening, stretching toward him. He could feel the familiar crushing weight on his chest, the icy cold in his stomach. He was pinned down. He was surrounded. There was no air, no escape. He slid down the rough-hewn log wall, the sat phone slipping from his numb fingers and clattering onto the floor. His breathing came in short, ragged gasps. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, trying to force the images back, but they came anyway. The smoke, the screams, the terrifying silence after. "Isaac?" Leah's voice sounded 1,000 miles away. He couldn't answer. He was losing. The anchor was cut, and he was drifting into the dark. A heavy weight slammed into his chest, knocking the air from him. His eyes flew open. Rook, the dog, had his front paws planted firmly on Isaac's shoulders, his face inches from his. The dog wasn't nudging. He was pushing, a solid, insistent counterpressure against the panic. He let out a sharp, concerned whine, a sound that cut through the ringing in Isaac's head. Isaac's hands, which had been shaking, flew up and gripped the thick fur of the dog's ruff. He stared into those deep brown eyes, so full of focus and unwavering loyalty. Rook just pushed harder, forcing Isaac to breathe. "I'm here, boy," Isaac choked out. "I'm here." He took one ragged, shuddering breath, and then another. The ringing faded. The walls snapped back into place. He looked past the dog. Leah was watching him, her face a mixture of fear and a strange, profound understanding. She didn't look at him like he was broken. She looked at him like she knew. The panic was still there, a cold serpent in his gut, but something else rose to meet it. It was cold, too, but hard as steel. It was the part of him he had tried to bury under 12 years of silence and routine. The Marine. He pushed Rook gently off his chest and stood up, his movements no longer hesitant. They were deliberate. "All right," he said. His voice was different. The fear was gone from it, replaced by a low, hard-edged resolve. "Isaac?" "They cut the line. They're jamming the SAT," he said, moving toward the living room. "That means they're out there, in this storm. They're not waiting for it to clear, they're just getting into position." He grabbed the end of the heavy mission-style sofa. "Help me." "What are you doing?" "That picture window is a kill zone," he said, grunting as he shoved the sofa. "We're not giving them an easy shot." He began to reinforce the house. He shoved the sofa and a heavy oak bookcase in front of the large window, creating a solid barrier of wood and upholstery. He went to the kitchen and wedged the heavy back dining chairs under the doorknobs of the front and back doors. He went to his bedroom and unlocked a steel gun safe. He pulled out a bolt-action hunting rifle and 2 boxes of ammunition. He placed them on the kitchen counter alongside the shotgun. He checked the action on his sidearm, a 1911 he'd kept from his service, and holstered it. He was no longer a hermit hiding from the world. He was a soldier fortifying a position. He worked in silence for 10 minutes, his movements economical, his mind a quiet, tactical map. Leah had not moved. She just watched him, her hand gripping the IV pole. She was a liability. She was weak, injured, and civilian. He needed her out of the way. "The hallway," he said, not looking at her. "It's the safest place. Stay there, away from all the exterior walls." She was silent. He stopped and finally looked at her. She had pulled herself up straighter. Her face was still pale, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her eyes were not afraid. They were burning with a hot, feverish rage that matched his own. "I'm not going to sit in a hallway and wait to be executed," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "I won't be another Ryan Cole." She met his gaze, unflinching. "What do I need to do?" Isaac looked at her, this broken, terrified woman who refused to be broken. He looked at the shotgun on the counter. He looked at Rook, who now sat at her feet, a shared guardian. He had his answer. He nodded once, a sharp, definitive motion. "First," he said, his voice hard as stone, "we learned to shoot." Night had fallen completely, a heavy, suffocating blanket of black and white. The blizzard did not pause. It simply changed character, the wind settling into a deep, monotonous, soul-shaking howl. Inside the fortified ranch house, the world had shrunk to the small, flickering islands of light cast by 2 oil lamps. One lamp sat on the kitchen counter, illuminating the steel of the hunting rifle and the 1911. The other sat on the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows over the living room, where Isaac and Leah were knelt on the bearskin rug. Between them lay the 12-gauge shotgun, broken open. "This is the safety," Isaac said. His voice was low and steady, a new cadence that had replaced the quiet farmer. This was the instructor. "It's a simple crossbolt. Red means it's ready." Leah just nodded, her eyes fixed on the weapon. She was pale, her body slumped with exhaustion. The IV bag was empty, and Isaac had removed the needle, patching the spot with medical tape. Her movements were stiff, her stitches clearly pulling, but she hadn't complained. "You don't aim a shotgun like a rifle," he continued, his hands moving over the weapon with an impersonal familiarity. "You point it. At this range, in this house, you just point at the center of the chest and pull the trigger. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice rough. She was terrified, but her eyes held a cold, hard fury that Isaac recognized. It was the anger of the hunted, the resolve of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Good. Load it." He pushed 2 heavy, brass-ended shells toward her. Her hands trembled as she picked one up. She fumbled, trying to align it with the open chamber. "Steady," Isaac said, his voice not rising. "In a panic, you'll be useless. Breathe. Focus on the simple task. Put the shell in the gun." She took a shaky breath, closed her eyes for a second, and opened them. Her hand was steadier. She slid the first shell in, then the second. "Close it." She gripped the forestock and the handle, but hesitated. "Close it," he commanded. She snapped it shut. The sound of the weapon locking was sharp and loud in the quiet room, a definitive, terrible punctuation. "Good," he said. He took the shotgun from her and placed it on the floor, leaning against the sofa within her reach. Now we wait. He settled into the worn leather armchair, the chair that had been his grandfather's. But he was not the man who had sat there this afternoon. The man who had almost succumbed to a panic attack was gone. In his place was a sentinel, his 1911 holstered on his hip, his eyes alert, scanning the dark corners of the room. Leah returned to the bearskin rug, pulling the heavy wool blanket around her, her back against the fortified sofa. Rook, who had watched the entire lesson with silent intensity, moved from the hallway and lay down near the hearth. He was not relaxed. His head was up, his ears twitching, his body a coiled spring. Hours passed. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the unending, maddening roar of the wind. It was a sound designed to fray the nerves, to hide other, smaller sounds. Isaac let his mind drift, not into the past, but into a state of heightened awareness. He cataloged the house's weaknesses. The front door barricaded, the back door wedged shut, the main windows blocked. That left the smaller windows and the basement. Leah's breathing had deepened. She had finally succumbed to her body's demands, her head slumped against the sofa, asleep. It was well past midnight when it happened. Rook was lying flat, his muzzle on his paws, seemingly asleep. Suddenly, his head snapped up. His eyes were wide, his ears pinned forward. Isaac saw it, and his hand immediately went to the pistol on his hip. He didn't move, just watched the dog. Rook stood up, not in a stretch, but in a single, fluid motion. He moved silently to the center of the room, his body low to the ground. He was staring, unblinking, at the closed door that led to the kitchen, and beyond it to the stairs of the basement. Isaac's blood turned to ice. A low, threatening vibration started deep in Rook's chest. It was a sound that Isaac had felt more than heard back on the porch with Harris. But this was different. It was a focused, sustained growl, a sound of absolute lethal warning. "Leah," Isaac whispered, his voice sharp as a razor. Her eyes flew open, wide with sleep-drugged terror. Isaac put a single finger to his lips. He pointed at the shotgun. She understood, her hands moving to the weapon, fumbling for the safety. "What is it?" she mouthed, her face a mask of fear. Isaac shook his head, his eyes on the dog. Rook was trembling, his gaze still locked on the basement door. Isaac slid off the armchair, his boots making no sound, on the wooden floor. He moved into the kitchen, his hand leaving his pistol and taking the 12-gauge from Leah's grasp. He needed the heavier weapon. He handed her his 1911. "Point it at the hallway. Don't shoot unless I tell you." He moved past Rook, who was now frozen, a silent statue of warning. He stood beside the basement door, listening. At first he heard nothing but the storm. The wind, the rattling of the house. He strained, trying to hear what the dog had heard. And then he caught it. It was a faint, high-pitched, scraping sound, like a fingernail on slate. It was almost impossible to hear, a tiny, needle-sharp sound buried deep beneath the storm's roar. Glass being scored. They weren't coming through the front, they weren't coming through the back, they were coming from below. Isaac's mind flashed to the small, ground-level windows in the basement, set in concrete wells now certainly filled with snow. A soft, vulnerable entry point he had overlooked. The scraping stopped. It was followed by a faint, muffled pop, the sound of a lock being broken. Isaac turned the doorknob, his heart a cold hammer. He opened the door an inch. The dark, cold air from the basement welled up, carrying a new sound, a soft, metallic click, a tool on stone. He gave Leah one last look. She was crouched behind the counter, the pistol held in a two-handed grip, shaking so hard he worried she would drop it. But she was there. He slipped through the door and onto the landing of the basement stairs, pulling the door shut behind him, plunging himself into absolute darkness. He stood still, letting his eyes adjust, his ears doing the work. The wind was quieter down here, muffled by earth and stone. A faint beam of light, no brighter than a pin, flashed across the far wall, illuminating old shelves of canned goods and tools. It clicked off. Another sound, a boot scuffing on the concrete floor. The intruder was moving toward the stairs. Isaac stepped down, his own feet silent, and flattened himself against the cold, damp stone wall at the bottom of the stairwell. He was invisible. He held the shotgun in a ready stance, aimed at the center of the darkness. A figure emerged from the deep shadows. Isaac could make out a silhouette, a man dressed in black, moving with a cautious, quiet competence. He had a heavy tool bag slung over one shoulder and a suppressed pistol in his hand. This was Corbin, the technician. He wasn't a frontline operator, he was an infiltrator, and his movements, while quiet, were the movements of a man focused on a task, not a man expecting a fight. His mission was to get inside, disable their last link, the sat phone, and let the primary team know the house was dark. Corbin reached the base of the stairs. He paused, listening. He took one step up, then another. He was 3 feet away when Isaac moved. It was not a fight. It was an explosion of violence. Isaac stepped from the shadow and slammed the butt of the shotgun into the man's chest. The air left Corbin's lungs in a suffocating gasp. The suppressed pistol flew from his numb fingers and clattered uselessly onto the concrete. Corbin was good, but he was a technician. Isaac was a Marine. Before Corbin could even register the attack, Isaac dropped the shotgun and seized the man's arm, the one that had held the pistol. He twisted it, stepping into the man's center of gravity, putting his weight onto the joint. There was a wet, sickening pop as the man's shoulder dislocated. A scream tore from Corbin's throat, but it was muffled, cut short as Isaac slammed him face first into the stone wall. Corbin crumpled to the floor, incoherent with pain, clutching his ruined shoulder. He was neutralized, but he was not contained. Isaac's face was a mask of cold, hard focus. He was not here to inflict pain. He was here to remove a threat. He looked at the man writhing on the floor. He needed him alive, but he needed him immobile. He pinned the man's legs with his knee. Corbin looked up, his eyes white with terror in the blackness. "Please, don't." Isaac raised his heavy work boot and brought his heel down, precisely and with all his weight, onto Corbin's left ankle. The sound was not loud. It was a sharp, wet, definitive crack. The man's body went rigid, and he passed out from the sheer, overwhelming agony. The basement was silent again, save for the man's shallow, unconscious breathing. Isaac stood up, his chest heaving, not from exertion, but from the adrenaline. He found the man's flashlight on the floor and clicked it on. The beam illuminated his captive, just a man in his late 20s, his face pale and sweating. A technician. Isaac found a roll of duct tape on a nearby shelf and bound the man's hands and his good foot. Then he slung the shotgun, grabbed the front of Corbin's tactical vest, and began to drag the dead weight of the unconscious man up the stairs. Isaac dragged the unconscious weight up the basement stairs, his muscles burning. The man, Corbin, was a dead weight, his broken ankle and dislocated shoulder making the task awkward and brutal. The sound was gruesome, a heavy, limp body bumping against the wooden steps, punctuated by the man's shallow, agonizing groans as consciousness began to flicker. He emerged into the kitchen, into the warm, flickering lamplight, and pulled the heavy basement door shut. The definitive thud echoed in the room. Leah was exactly where he had left her, crouched behind the counter, the heavy 1911 still gripped in her trembling hands. Her eyes were wide, fixed not on Isaac, but on the man he dragged. She looked like she was going to be sick. Rook was on his feet, his body rigid, a low, menacing rumble originating deep in his chest. He was focused entirely on the intruder. "Easy, boy," Isaac grunted, his voice strained. "Watch the hall." The dog didn't relax, but he obeyed, shifting his position to stand between them and the dark hallway, a living shield. Isaac dumped Corbin's body onto the cold linoleum floor. The man let out a sharp, breathless scream as his broken ankle hit the ground. The sound cut short as the pain dragged him back under. "He's not a soldier," Isaac said, more to himself than to Leah. "He's a technician. He's not trained for this." What are you doing?" Leah whispered. "I need to know what's out there," Isaac said. He grabbed a heavy wooden chair from the dining table and slammed it down in the middle of the kitchen. He hoisted the unconscious man into it, his movements rough and efficient. He used the duct tape he'd brought up from the basement, binding Corbin's hands behind the chair, strapping his chest to the backrest. His ruined ankle dangled uselessly. "He won't talk," Leah said, her voice shaking. "Those men, they won't." "He will," Isaac said. He went to the sink, filled a cup with cold water from the pump, and threw it in Corbin's face. Corbin awoke with a violent, choking gasp. His eyes flew open, wild with confusion, which instantly turned to white-hot agony. A raw scream tore from his throat as the pain from his shoulder and ankle hit his brain. He thrashed against the tape, his face pale and slick with sweat and cold water. "Who are you?" he gasped, his eyes darting between Isaac, Leah, and the growling dog. "What is this?" "I'm the man whose house you broke into," Isaac said, his voice a low, cold monotone. He stood directly in front of Corbin, his shadow falling over him. "You have one chance. How many are out there? What's your objective?" Corbin spat at him, a gesture of defiance that was immediately undercut by a whimper of pain. Go to hell. You're dead. You're both dead. Harris will—" He choked, his eyes rolling back as he fought against the pain. "Wrong answer," Isaac said. He grabbed the man's jaw, his thumb pressing into the nerve cluster beneath his ear. Corbin screamed again, a thin, piercing sound. "Stop!" Leah cried out, taking a step forward. "Isaac, don't! You're hurting him!" "Stay back, Leah," Isaac commanded, his voice sharp as broken glass. He didn't look at her. He looked only at Corbin. "He's tight-lipped," Isaac said, his voice flat. He released Corbin's jaw. The technician was sobbing now, a mess of fear and pain. But his training was holding. He hadn't given them anything. Isaac stepped back. The adrenaline from the fight, the cold, hard focus of the soldier, was beginning to ebb. And in its place, the thing he always held at bay began to seep in. The room was too quiet, save for the man's ragged breathing and the howl of the wind. Isaac's hand, the one he had used on Corbin's jaw, began to tremble. It started as a fine tremor, a vibration in the muscles. He stared at it, his focus locking onto the small, betraying movement. He could feel the cold sweat on his own neck. He felt the walls of the kitchen pressing in, the air growing thin and hot. Corbin, sensing the shift, stopped sobbing. He watched Isaac, his eyes narrowed in confusion. Isaac looked up, his gaze lifting from his own hand to Corbin's face. But he wasn't looking at Corbin. His eyes were focused 1,000 yards past him, seeing a different face, a different room, a different world of smoke and screaming. This was the stare, the one Rook was trained to recognize. Leah saw it too. "Isaac," she whispered, her voice now laced with a new kind of fear, not for the man in the chair, but for the man standing in front of him. Rook whined. The dog backed up a step, his ears flat, his body language suddenly submissive and confused. This was not the master he knew. This was the man he was meant to save. And in that moment, seeing the terror he inspired in both of them, Isaac made a conscious choice. He had tried to be the hard man, the soldier, and it hadn't worked. Now he would let the monster out. He would use the broken thing inside him. He didn't fight the tremor. He let it take over, his whole hand shaking visibly in the lamplight. He let his gaze stay distant, unfocused, and terrifying. He took a step closer to Corbin, who instinctively tried to shrink back, but the tape held him fast. Isaac began to speak, his voice no longer hard, but a soft, strange, whispering monotone. The sound, Isaac whispered, his eyes fixed on something over Corbin's shoulder. "It's the sound that gets you. It never stops. It just gets inside your head. You can't get it out." What are you talking about?" Corbin stammered, his bravado gone, replaced by a creeping dread. "I don't—" "And the cold," Isaac continued, his voice a dry rasp. He looked down at Corbin's shattered ankle. "It gets in the bone. It feels like this." Isaac reached out with his shaking hand and gently, almost delicately, laid his fingers on the broken joint. Corbin shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, thrashing so violently the heavy wooden chair slid 6 inches across the floor. "Get away from me! Get away!" "I need to know," Isaac whispered, his 1,000-yard stare now locking onto Corbin's eyes. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was unhinged. He was a man with nothing left to lose, a man who had already seen the worst the world had to offer and was perfectly willing to share the experience. "They're coming, aren't they? They're always coming. You have to make them stop." "You're crazy," Corbin sobbed, tears and sweat streaming down his face. "You're insane." "He's right outside," Isaac whispered, leaning in so close Corbin could feel his breath. "The man with the noise. He's right there. I can hear him. Can't you hear him?" This was it. Corbin wasn't dealing with a homeowner. He wasn't dealing with a soldier. He was trapped in a house in the middle of a blizzard with a madman. His training hadn't prepared him for this. "No, stop, please." Corbin finally broke, his voice cracking. "I'll talk. I'll tell you. Just stop." The act dropped. In an instant, the tremor stopped. Isaac's eyes cleared, becoming cold and hard as flint. The shift was so sudden, so total, it was more terrifying than the madness. "The orders," Isaac said, his voice a flat, dead command. "Now." It's just what you think," Corbin gasped, desperate to appease him. "Harris, his orders, they never change. Say them." "Recover the asset," Corbin yelled. And what?" Corbin looked at Leah, his eyes wide with a terrible, final knowledge. "Sterilize the site," he finally choked out. Leah's hand went to her mouth, a small choked sound escaping. "Sterilize?" Isaac didn't look at her. He had his confirmation. "Kill everyone," he said, his voice flat. "Leave no witnesses." "He never leaves witnesses," Corbin whispered, his body slumping in the chair, defeated. "He'll kill me too. Even if I get out, he'll kill me." Isaac stared at the man for a long moment. He had what he needed. He turned to the kitchen counter and picked up the roll of duct tape. What are you doing now?" Corbin asked, his voice trembling. Isaac didn't answer. He ripped off a long strip of tape and pressed it firmly over Corbin's mouth, cutting off his sobs. He ripped the chair away from the man's body, the tape tearing with a sound like a scream. Corbin fell in a heap to the floor. Isaac grabbed the front of his vest. "Isaac, no," Leah whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. She had heard the orders. Isaac ignored her. He began to drag the man back across the kitchen, back toward the basement door. Corbin thrashed, his good leg kicking uselessly, his screams muffled behind the tape. Isaac unlocked the door, opened it, and dragged him to the top of the dark stairs. With a grunt, he shoved the man. Corbin tumbled, his body hitting the steps with a series of sickening, wet thuds, until he landed in a crumpled heap on the concrete floor below. Isaac walked calmly down the stairs, the beam of his flashlight finding the man, who was conscious, hyperventilating, and broken. He grabbed him again and dragged him across the cold floor, past the shelves of tools, to the far wall. There, set into the foundation, was a heavy ancient oak door, banded with iron. The root cellar. He opened it. The air that came out was cold and smelled of damp earth and potatoes. He shoved Corbin inside onto the dirt floor. He slammed the heavy door, the sound final. He slid the thick iron bolt that locked it from the outside. He walked back up the stairs, his boots steady on the steps. He closed the heavy basement door, locking it. Then, for good measure, he grabbed the dining room chair he had used earlier and wedged it firmly under the knob. The internal threat was contained. He turned. Leah was still by the counter, her arms wrapped around herself. Rook had moved to her side, pressing against her leg. She was staring at him, her eyes unreadable. She was safe from the man in the cellar. But Isaac knew as he looked at her that she had just seen exactly what he was capable of, and he wasn't sure if she or he would ever recover from it. Isaac slid the heavy iron bolt on the root cellar door, sealing Corbin in the cold, earthen darkness. The muffled, terrified sounds from below were cut off instantly. He turned and faced Leah, the kitchen lamplight carving deep shadows under his eyes. The man she had seen use calculated psychology to break a prisoner was gone, replaced by a cold, focused urgency. "He was the technician," Isaac said, his voice low, already moving, his mind processing. "They sent him in to cut the sat phone. That means the jammer is just a bubble. They're trying to keep us in, but also keep us from getting out." He looked at the useless satellite phone on the counter. "I have to get outside that bubble. The ridge. It's high enough. It might clear the interference." "No," Leah said, her voice shaking, but her eyes resolute. "You can't. That's insane. Harris, that man, they're out there. They're waiting. The man you just—" She motioned to the basement door. "He was just the first." "He was a test," Isaac corrected her, his voice hard. "And they're out there whether I go or not. This," he picked up Leah's hard drive from the counter, "is the only thing that matters. It's the only way this ends, other than them coming through that door." He went to the gun safe, pulled out his bolt-action hunting rifle and a box of ammunition. He shoved the hard drive, the sat phone, and its connecting cable into a small, waterproof day pack. "Lock this door behind me," he said to Leah, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Barricade it with the chair like we did the others. Do not open it, not for my voice, not for any sound. I will be back, or I won't." He looked down at Rook. The dog was already on his feet, his body trembling, not with fear, but with a tense, vibrating energy. He knew the rifle. "You're with me, boy," Isaac said. "You're my eyes." Leah said nothing, just nodded, her knuckles white on the 1911 he had given her. Isaac unlocked the back door, the chair scraping against the floor. He and Rook slipped out, disappearing instantly into the roaring white chaos. The storm was a physical entity. It was a solid, screaming wall of ice and wind that stole his breath and clawed at his skin. Visibility was less than 10 feet. He didn't use the driveway. He went low, hugging the side of the house, using the generator hut as his first piece of cover. He moved in a low crouch, the rifle slung tight to his chest. Rook was a gray and white ghost at his heels, moving with an animal silence that Isaac could only envy. Move, pause, scan, move. His training took over. He was no longer a farmer. He was no longer a hermit. He was a Marine, moving through hostile territory. From the generator hut to the ancient snow-covered woodpile. Pause, scan. Listen. Nothing but the wind. From the woodpile to the thick stand of lodgepole pines that marked the beginning of the incline. Move. The climb up the ridge was a special kind of hell. The snow was deep, filling his boots, its weight trying to drag him back. His lungs burned, the frigid air feeling like it was tearing his throat. Rook, lighter and more agile, bounded ahead, pausing every few yards to look back, his dark eyes urging his master on. After what felt like an hour, they reached the summit, a small, rocky outcropping of granite that was windswept and almost bare of snow. The wind here was not a howl. It was a high-pitched, deafening shriek. Isaac dropped behind the largest boulder, pulling Rook in tight beside him. He unslung the pack, his fingers already stiff and clumsy with the cold. He pulled out the satellite phone. He powered it on. The screen flickered. The signal interference message flashed, then stuttered, then vanished. He had bars. 2. A weak, pathetic signal, but it was a signal. He connected the hard drive to the phone's port. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely seat the cable. He dialed Mark's number. It rang once. "Isaac, I've been waiting." Mark's voice was a tinny burst of static, but it was real. "I'm on the ridge, Mark. I'm outside the jammer. I'm sending the package now. It's uploading. But it's slow. I'm on it. The server is open. Just keep the connection steady. What's happening? Are you—" "No time," Isaac gritted, his eyes scanning the white darkness. "It's uploading. 3%? 4? He was a statue, a man and a dog, exposed on a ridgetop, broadcasting a signal. He was a beacon. Miles away, in a blacked-out SUV parked in a dip of the road, Shaw saw him. Shaw was the team's sniper, a man of infinite patience. He had been scanning the storm for 2 hours through a high-end thermal scope. The world to him was a grainy, shifting landscape of cold blue and purple. And then 2 bright, beautiful sparks of white-hot energy appeared on the ridge. A large one, kneeling, a smaller one, sitting beside it. "I have them," Shaw spoke into his comms, his voice a calm monotone. "Target confirmed, on the west ridge. He's static." "He's trying the sat phone," Harris's voice crackled back. "The technician is dark. Take the shot." "Roger, compensating for wind." Shaw settled the crosshairs of his scope directly on the center of the larger heat signature. He let out half a breath. The wind was a variable, but the target was stationary. He squeezed the trigger. On the ridge, Isaac watched the number climb. 19%, 20. Rook, who had been sitting, suddenly stood, his head high, sniffing the wind. He let out a low, uneasy whine. "Easy, boy," Isaac muttered, his eyes glued to the screen. "Almost there. 21. In that instant, 3 things happened at once. The first was a sound Isaac hadn't heard since his last tour. It wasn't the bang of a rifle. That was miles away, lost in the storm. It was the sharp, distinct pop of a supersonic bullet breaking the sound barrier as it passed him, a terrifying, instantaneous warning that death was already in the air. The second was Rook. The dog didn't just bark. He exploded, launching himself from a sitting position, his full 80-pound weight slamming into Isaac's right side with a protective, frantic force. The third was Isaac's own body. The pop registered in his brain. His training, drilled into his muscle memory, screamed, "Sniper." He was already moving, twisting, diving for the ground as Rook hit him. The combined force of his own dive and the dog's impact sent him sprawling. A white-hot, searing fire ripped through his left shoulder. It felt like being hit by a sledgehammer. He crashed into a snowdrift, his face plunging into the icy powder. The sat phone flew from his grasp, skittering across the rock. The pain was blinding. He gasped, but the wind stole his breath. He was hit. Rook was on top of him, barking frantically, not at him, but at the white darkness, a furious, rapid-fire alarm. "Down, Rook! Down!" Isaac groaned, pushing the dog off him. His left arm was useless, a dead weight. He looked down and saw a dark, spreading stain on the snow beneath his shoulder. He had survived. It wasn't just the wind, which had pushed the bullet slightly. It wasn't just his reflex. It wasn't just Rook. It was all 3. His own training, his dog's warning, and the blizzard's chaos had collided in that one. Split second of violence, turning a kill shot into a graze. He saw the phone. It was lying screen up in the snow, its light a pale green beacon. The upload. He crawled, his teeth gritted against the fire in his shoulder, dragging his useless arm. He grabbed the phone. Upload complete. "Mark," he yelled into the device, his voice hoarse. "Mark, it's sent. I'm hit." He got no reply, just static. The phone, jarred by the fall, was dead. "Come on, boy," he gasped, pushing himself to his feet, a wave of dizziness washing over him. "We have to go. We have to go now." He stumbled, grabbing his rifle, and began the agonizing descent, the blizzard covering his bloody tracks as fast as he made them. In a dark, secure office hundreds of miles away, Mark Jensen stared at his monitors. The download was complete. "Isaac," he yelled into his headset. "Isaac, talk to me." He heard the yell, "I'm hit." And then nothing. The signal was gone. "No," Mark whispered. His fingers flew across his keyboard. He opened the file. It wasn't a document. It wasn't data. It was a video file, 3.2 gigabytes. He double-clicked. The video was shaky, low light, clearly from a hidden camera. He saw a man on his knees in the dirt. Ryan Cole. He was pleading. "Please, I have a family." A man in black tactical gear stepped into the frame. He was calm. He was smiling. Harris. Harris raised a suppressed pistol, and before Mark could even process it, there was a quiet, muffled sound. Ryan Cole fell forward. Mark ripped his headset off, his stomach churning. He backed away from the desk. He wasn't a tech specialist anymore. He wasn't just helping an old friend. He had just become a witness to a cold-blooded murder. He looked at his other screen, where the satellite signal's origin was plotted on a map of rural Montana. He grabbed his phone. His duty was no longer just to his friend. It was to the man on that video. He had to act. Isaac fell through the back door, his body crashing against the jamb. He brought the blizzard in with him, a cloud of swirling snow and icy wind that momentarily extinguished the nearest oil lamp, plunging the kitchen into deeper shadow. "Isaac!" Leah's scream was thin and sharp. He slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt. He was breathing in ragged, agonizing gasps. He leaned against the wall, his rifle clattering to the floor. His left shoulder was a mass of dark, wet crimson, the blood soaking through his jacket and steaming in the warm air of the house. Rook was instantly at his side, whining, licking at his master's face, his body trembling with a distress that mirrored Isaac's. "I'm all right, boy," Isaac grunted, his teeth gritted. "I'm all right." He looked at Leah, who was frozen by the counter, her eyes wide with terror at the sight of the blood. There was no time for shock. There was no time for comfort. The sniper, Shaw, would have already reported the hit. Harris would know he was wounded. They wouldn't wait. The courteous visit was over. The time for games was done. "He's hit," Isaac said, his voice a low, painful rasp. "That means they're coming. They're coming now. The house is a coffin." He grabbed his rifle from the floor with his good right hand. He looked at the 1911 in her hand. "Do you still have the tape?" She nodded, confused. "Go to the basement," he commanded, his voice hard as iron. "Not the cellar where he is. The other side. The root cellar. Bolt the door from the inside. Use the tape. Seal the crack. Do not make a sound. Do not come out, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me?" "I won't leave you," she said, her voice trembling. "You will," he snapped, the force of the command rattling her. "I am not protecting you in here. I am drawing them away. I am setting a trap, but you cannot be in it. Go, now. That is an order." He didn't wait for her to obey. He turned to his dog. "Rook, with me." He unbolted the back door again. Leah just stood there, paralyzed, watching him. "Go, Leah," he shouted. He plunged back into the storm. The blizzard was a mercy. It covered his tracks, it masked his sound, and it hid his pain. He fought his way through the chest-deep drifts, his left arm a useless, burning weight. Rook was a gray shadow at his side. He wasn't heading for the ridge. He was heading for the barn. The barn was 100 yards from the house. It was an old, heavy timber structure, smelling of hay, cold iron, and generator fuel. He slid the massive door open just enough to slip inside, then shut it, dropping the heavy wooden bar into place. Darkness. Silence, save for the muffled roar of the wind against the roof and the sound of his own blood dripping onto the dusty floor. Rook stood by his leg, growling low in his chest. "Easy," Isaac whispered, leaning against a support beam. He was losing blood. He was getting dizzy. He didn't have much time. He pulled himself up the ladder to the hayloft, the effort nearly making him pass out. His good arm shook. He lay flat on the dry, scratchy hay, his rifle positioned, his view covering the barn door and the house beyond. He didn't have to wait long. Two figures, distorted by the snow and the darkness, emerged from the whiteout. They were moving fast, covered in matte black gear. Harris and the last operator, Kane. They didn't knock on the house door. Kane kicked it open, a dark, violent hole. They disappeared inside. Isaac waited. He counted. 10 seconds. 20. They re-emerged, furious. They had found the barricades, found the blood, but no victims. Harris pointed at the ground, then directly at the barn. His instincts were good. They moved toward the barn, splitting up. Kane went low, heading for the small side door. Harris came straight for the main entrance. Isaac shifted his rifle, his shoulder screaming. He aimed at Kane. The man was a professional, moving low and fast. Cain reached the side door and raised his boot. Isaac fired. The sound of the high-velocity rifle shot inside the enclosed space of the barn was a single, deafening explosion of sound. It was absolute. Cain's body was thrown backward, a dark shape against the snow, and he did not move. "Cain!" Harris's voice was a raw, furious scream. The main barn door exploded inward, the heavy wooden bar splintering as Harris used a sledgehammer from the porch. Harris was inside. He wasn't tactical anymore. He was a storm. "Perry!" he roared, his pistol up, sweeping the darkness. Isaac tried to cycle the bolt on his rifle, but his wounded left arm wouldn't obey. The action was jammed. He was useless. Harris saw the movement in the loft. He fired, his pistol spitting yellow flame into the dark. Bullets ripped through the hay bales around Isaac, the sounds of their impact like angry hornets. Isaac rolled, abandoning the rifle, and dropped from the loft, landing hard on the packed earth floor below. The impact sent a bolt of pure, white-hot agony through his entire body. He cried out, his vision swimming. Harris was on him in a second. He was a blur of black efficiency. He kicked Isaac in his wounded shoulder, and Isaac collapsed, his world reduced to a universe of pain. This was it, the elite warrior against the wounded veteran. Harris was fresh, strong, and fueled by rage. Isaac was one-armed and bleeding out. It wasn't a fight. It was a beating. Harris drove his boot into Isaac's ribs. He kicked the 1911, which Isaac had drawn in the fall, sending it skittering away into the shadows. He straddled Isaac's chest, his fists piston-fast, a brutal, efficient assault. Isaac could only block, his good arm failing, the world turning gray at the edges. "You should have stayed hidden, old man," Harris snarled, his face inches from Isaac's. "You should have let her die." He pulled his sidearm from its holster. He pressed the cold steel muzzle directly against Isaac's temple. "It's over." A gray and white missile, silent as death, shot from the shadows. Rook. The dog had been waiting, stalking. He launched himself at Harris, his jaws open, sinking his teeth deep into the gun arm. The sound of the dog's snarl was a terrifying, ripping sound. Harris screamed, a sound of pure shock and pain. He tried to shake the dog off, but Rook held fast, his 80-pound body a weight of pure, loyal fury. "Get off!" Harris roared. He slammed the butt of his pistol into the dog's skull. Rook yelped but held. Harris hit him again, harder. With a pained cry, Rook's jaws loosened, and Harris kicked him, a brutal, full-force kick that sent the dog flying. Rook hit the side of a stall and lay still, whimpering, but it was enough. That 1 second of distraction. As Harris turned his attention back, his gun rising, Isaac moved. He wasn't a man. He was pure reflex. He drove his right hand up, not at the gun, but at Harris's wrist, trapping it. At the same time, he hooked his leg, locking Harris's ankle. He used his last ounce of strength, bridging his hips, using Harris's own weight against him. It was a perfect reversal. Harris was thrown off balance. His gun arm was still trapped in Isaac's iron grip. Isaac twisted. There was a sound. Not loud. It was a wet, sickening, definitive snap. Harris's arm broke. The scream that tore from Harris's throat was inhuman. The pistol fell from his limp, useless fingers. Isaac rolled free, grabbing the fallen pistol. He scrambled to his feet, his body a single, screaming nerve of agony. He was standing. Harris was on his knees, clutching his ruined, dangling arm, his face a mask of disbelief and agony. Isaac raised the pistol, his good right hand shaking, not from the cold, not from blood loss. It was shaking with a white-hot, blinding rage. This was it. The moment. The end. The man who had hunted them, the man who had ordered Ryan Cole's death, the man who had just tried to kill his dog. The ringing in Isaac's ears was back, a single, pure note of focused hate. His finger tightened on the trigger. The ghosts of Ramadi were at his back, screaming at him to finish it, sterilize the sight. "Don't!" The scream cut through the blood haze. It was high-pitched, thin, and terrified. Isaac's head snapped toward the barn door. Leah. She was standing there, the 1911 dangling from her hand. She had disobeyed. She had come for him. She was staring not at Harris, but at him, at his face, at the gun. Her own face was a mask of utter, profound terror. She was seeing a monster. She was remembering the video, the man on his knees, the gun. "Don't!" she screamed again, her voice cracking, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Isaac, don't, just like they did to Ryan." The name, Ryan Cole, was a bucket of ice water. The red haze vanished. The ringing in his ears stopped. He wasn't in Fallujah. He was in his barn. He looked at Leah, who was trembling so hard she could barely stand. He looked at Harris, who was just a broken, beaten man, whimpering on the floor. He looked at the pistol in his hand. The tremor in his hand stopped. He lowered the gun. He let out a long, ragged breath, the first one he'd taken in what felt like a lifetime. He looked at Leah, and his voice was not the voice of a soldier. It was just a man. "It's okay," he rasped. It's over." The pistol felt impossibly heavy in Isaac's hand. He lowered it, his arm shaking, not with rage, but with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The metallic smell of burnt cordite hung in the cold air, sharp and acrid. In the sudden, deafening silence, there were only three sounds: the muffled howl of the blizzard outside, the ragged, agonizing breathing of Harris, and a high-pitched, painful whimpering from the shadows. "Rook," Isaac breathed. His rage, his training, his trauma, it all evaporated, replaced by a single, sharp, cold spike of terror. He let the pistol hang at his side and staggered, his wounded shoulder screaming, toward the stall where Rook had fallen. Leah was still frozen at the entrance, her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide, still trapped in the horror of what she had witnessed, both from Harris and from him. "Isaac, your arm," she whispered. He ignored her. "Rook, come on, boy." He found him in the straw. The dog was on his side, his legs twitching, a low, constant cry of pain coming from his throat. "No, no, no!" Isaac dropped to his knees, his good hand running frantically over the dog's ribs, his flank. "Where did he get you? Where is it?" Rook's tail gave a single, weak thump against the floor. He licked Isaac's hand, his breathing shallow. Isaac ran his fingers gently along the dog's rib cage. He felt the unnatural give of broken bones. Harris's boot, aimed with killing force, had done its damage. "Broken ribs," Isaac said, his voice thick. He looked at Leah, his eyes pleading. He's hurt bad." Leah finally moved, galvanized by a problem she could solve. She ran back into the house, her footsteps frantic, and returned moments later with the canvas medic bag. As Isaac began to gently, expertly wrap Rook's chest, binding the ribs tight to keep them from puncturing a lung, Leah moved to Harris. She kicked his drop pistol away, and, using the roll of duct tape from Corbin's discarded gear, she bound his hands and his feet, her movements angry and efficient. They secured the barn. They left Harris shivering and moaning against the wall. They found Kane's body by the side door, still in the snow. They checked on Shaw, the sniper, but he was gone, vanished back into the storm. And then they waited. Isaac sat on the hay-strewn floor of the barn, his back against a support beam. His left shoulder was a dull, throbbing fire, a wound he had patched but could not properly treat. Leah sat near him, the shotgun across her lap, her eyes on the door, and between them Rook lay, his head in Isaac's lap. The dog's breathing was shallow, but the whimpering had stopped. They shared their warmth, two wounded figures in the dark, waiting for the dawn. The storm broke just before sunrise. The wind, which had been a constant deafening shriek for what felt like a lifetime, simply stopped. The silence that fell over the ranch was as sudden and profound as a gunshot. Hours later, they heard it. Not a rumble, but the clear, distant sound of a siren, growing steadily closer. A single Montana Highway Patrol vehicle, its blue and red lights flashing, slid to a stop in the new-fallen snow. A man stepped out, his hand on his holstered weapon. He was in his 50s, with a weathered face and a thick mustache, his uniform crisp. This was Trooper Davis. He had been a state trooper for 20 years, and he looked like a man who had seen everything. But as he took in the scene, the kicked-in front door, the blood on the snow by the barn, his expression tightened. "I got a call," Trooper Davis said, his voice a pragmatic baritone. "About a welfare check, a possible homicide in progress. I wasn't expecting this." Isaac walked slowly from the barn, his good hand raised. "He's in the barn, Trooper. The man who was hunting us. He's alive. The other is in the root cellar." Trooper Davis's eyes fixed on the drying blood on Isaac's shoulder, then on Leah, pale and trembling, then on the broken barn door. "Son," he said, "you have a world of explaining to do." "It's all here," Leah said, her voice hoarse, holding up the hard drive. "It's all on video. The man in the barn. His name is Harris. He works for GeneSys. He murdered my source." The name GeneSys did not get a reaction, but the video did. It took hours. Trooper Davis was methodical, professional. He secured Harris. He retrieved a terrified, half-frozen, and severely broken Corbin from the root cellar. He confirmed Kane's body. He put out an alert for the missing sniper, Shaw. And then the black SUVs arrived. They came in a silent, efficient convoy of 3, their tires crunching on the snow. Men in dark suits and FBI windbreakers fanned out, securing the perimeter with a speed that was almost unnerving. The man who stepped out of the lead vehicle was tall, with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. He wore his authority like a well-fitted suit. He walked directly to Isaac and Leah. "Mr. Perry, Ms. Adams," he said, his voice cutting through the cold air. "I'm Special Agent Dunn. Your friend, Mark Jensen, has been on the line with my office for the last 8 hours." He looked at Harris, who was being loaded into an ambulance under armed guard. "We've been building a file on GeneSys and their Apex security for 18 months, Dunn said, his expression grim. "We had shell casings, bank transfers, and disappearances. We had everything but a smoking gun. Your friend," he nodded at Leah, "just handed it to us. The video of the Ryan Cole execution is the keystone. You two just brought down an entire empire." Leah finally let go. The hard drive slipped from her fingers into the snow. She put her face in her hands, and the sobs she had held back for 2 days finally came, a ragged, raw sound of grief and release. Isaac just stood there, the tension draining out of him, leaving him so lightheaded he almost fell. An EMT was at his side, guiding him toward the second ambulance. "Sir, you need to come with us. That shoulder." He looked back. He saw Rook being gently lifted onto a stretcher by another officer. "My dog," he said. "He'll be at the veterinary hospital in town before you're even stitched up, sir," the EMT said gently. It was over. It was finally, truly over. 4 months later, the snow was gone, replaced by the tentative bright green of a Montana spring. The ranch was silent again, but it was no longer the silence of isolation. It was the silence of peace. In the living room, a news report played softly on the television. A serious-faced anchor spoke of the GeneSys scandal, of the indictments of its entire board, of the federal charges against the rogue private military firm known as Apex. Harris, Shaw, and Corbin were named, their faces appearing on the screen. And then another face. Ryan Cole. He was being hailed as a hero, a whistleblower who had paid the ultimate price. The front door opened. Isaac Perry stepped inside. He looked lighter. The lines of pain and worry around his eyes had softened. His left shoulder, healed but scarred, moved without stiffness. He was wearing clean jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. He had just driven back from town. Leah was sitting at the kitchen table, a laptop open in front of her. She looked up and smiled, a real warm smile that reached her eyes. "How was it?" Isaac paused. He set his keys on the counter. "It was hard," he admitted. "Dr. Harris says I'm making progress. We talked about the barn." "That's good," Leah said softly. "That's really good, Isaac." He nodded, a small private gesture. He had fought a war overseas, and then he had fought one in his own home. Now, every Tuesday at 10 a.m., he was fighting the last war, the one inside his own head. And for the first time, he wasn't fighting it alone. He walked to the open front door and stepped out onto the porch. The sun was bright, the air clean. A flash of gray and white shot around the corner of the house. Rook, his ribs had healed, his limp was gone. He ran to Isaac, his claws ticking on the porch wood, his tail a blur of motion. But he didn't stop. He ran past Isaac, grabbed a worn-out tennis ball, and dropped it at his feet, his dark eyes bright, his mouth open in a happy, slobbering grin. Isaac stared at the dog. Rook wasn't at his heel. He wasn't watching the perimeter. He wasn't growling at shadows or sensing a panic attack. He was just a dog, begging his master to play. Isaac's throat tightened. He reached down, his hand, the same hand that had held a gun, the same hand that had trembled with trauma, was perfectly steady. He picked up the ball. He looked out over his quiet valley, took a deep breath of the spring air, and threw it. "Go get it, boy," he said. Rook bounded off the porch, a joyful gray and white streak running across the green grass. Isaac watched him, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. He sat down on the top step, his anchor no longer a weight, but a source of joy. He was home.